Tasha was a hard-working single mother living in a vibrant but demanding city, where every day felt like a battle to keep her family afloat and moving forward. She juggled 2 jobs, one at a local diner where she waited tables during the day, and another cleaning office buildings at night, barely getting enough rest but always pushing herself to make sure her young son had everything he needed. Her days were long and exhausting, but she never complained, fueled by a fierce determination to provide a better life for her child. Every morning, before the city woke fully to its relentless pace, she would stop at the same neighborhood gas station, a small but familiar spot where the attendants knew her by name, and the quiet routine helped her start the day with a sense of calm. Her car was old, its paint chipped and worn from years of faithful service, but it was reliable and, most importantly, it was hers. That particular morning was cold, the kind of early fall chill that made the breath visible in short, sharp puffs. As Tasha pulled her car up to the pump, she noticed an elderly man standing nearby, looking confused and slightly frail as he fiddled with the gas pump handle. His jacket immediately caught her attention. It was adorned with patches and medals, telling a silent story of years of service and sacrifice. Despite his age, there was a quiet dignity about him, a resilience that spoke volumes. Tasha's heart softened instantly. She stepped out of her car and approached him gently, her voice warm as she asked, "Need a hand, sir?" The man looked up, relief flooding his eyes, and explained that his credit card had just been declined and he didn't have enough cash on hand to pay for the gas. Tasha didn't hesitate for a second. Without a second thought, she smiled and said, "I'll pay for your gas. It's the least I can do." She went inside to the cashier and handed over her card, insisting on covering the cost. The veteran, whose name was Harold, looked at her with deep gratitude, his eyes glistening with appreciation. "Thank you, young lady. Not many people show kindness these days," he said softly, his voice tinged with both gratitude and a hint of loneliness. Tasha brushed off his thanks, saying, "It's nothing. You served our country. It's the right thing to do." Harold smiled and promised, "I'll find a way to repay your kindness someday." As she got back into her car and drove away, Tasha felt a lightness she hadn't felt in weeks, a quiet joy that came from helping someone who truly deserved it. Little did she know, this simple act of generosity was the beginning of a chain of events that would change her life in ways she never imagined, opening doors to new friendships, unexpected support, and a community united by gratitude and respect. The next morning, just as the soft amber glow of sunrise began to seep through the curtains of her modest apartment, Tasha was startled awake by a series of heavy rhythmic knocks on her front door, urgent, deliberate, and unlike anything she had heard before. She sat up, heart pounding, thoughts racing through the possibilities. Was it the landlord, a neighbor, or worse, some kind of emergency? Still in her pajamas, she grabbed a robe and tiptoed to the window to peek outside, and what she saw made her eyes widen in shock. Dozens of men in marine dress blues lined in formation across her tiny front yard, their posture perfect, their expressions calm but focused. The rising sun catching the glint of medals, insignias, and polished shoes. Her jaw dropped, her mind scrambling to understand what was happening, why this was happening, and how on earth they had come to her door. She opened it slowly, cautiously, the cold air rushing in, and stood on her porch staring at the surreal scene before her, blinking as if trying to snap herself out of a dream. One of the Marines stepped forward, tall and commanding yet warm in demeanor, offering a kind smile that contrasted with the formality of the moment. "Are you Tasha?" he asked with steady confidence. "I'm Sergeant Miller. We're here on behalf of Harold, the veteran you helped yesterday." Tasha nodded slowly, speechless, still trying to process the sight of over 30 uniformed men standing at attention on her lawn. Yes, I'm Tasha. What's going on?" she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible through the whirlwind of emotion that surged within her. Sergeant Miller explained, in heartfelt words, that Harold was not just any old veteran, but a decorated Marine with an esteemed reputation and a long history of service, who had mentored many of the men now standing before her. Upon returning to his residence, he had spoken passionately to them about the woman who had shown him kindness at a moment when he felt invisible, a stranger who had treated him with dignity, not pity, someone who had extended her hand not because she wanted recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. That story had reverberated through the barracks like wildfire, igniting something powerful in each of them. "We came to thank you in person," Miller said. "In our line of work, honor and loyalty matter more than words can say. And what you did, it meant something." Tears welled in Tasha's eyes, her lips trembling as the reality of the moment sank in. She'd never expected gratitude so, not like this, and it touched something deep within her that had long been numb from years of hardship and struggle. With a shaky voice, she invited them inside, apologizing for the cramped space and lack of preparation. But the Marines were not there for comfort. They were there for connection. One by one, they stepped in, carefully navigating the small living room and kitchen, sharing her space with respectful ease, turning the humble home into something extraordinary. They spoke with warmth and openness, sharing stories about her mentor, the friend, the Marine who'd kept them grounded during the toughest of deployments. Tasha learned about Harold's incredible life, the the battles he had fought overseas and within himself, and how, in his twilight years, her act of kindness had reminded him that humanity still thrived in the world. Over mugs of instant coffee and the simple breakfast Tasha insisted on preparing eggs toast, and whatever she could find in her kitchen, they laughed, reminisced, and most importantly, bonded. They listened as she shared her own story, of raising a son on her own, of working 2 jobs, of trying to survive in a system that often overlooked women like her. And in her honesty, they saw courage. In her generosity, they saw leadership. Outside, neighbors began to gather, curious about the spectacle of military uniforms in their quiet neighborhood. Some stood in awe, others recorded videos, but many soon joined the gathering, bringing food, offering chairs, and turning the morning into a spontaneous community event. Tasha's son Malik, barely 10 years old, stood at the center of it all, his eyes shining with admiration as he watched these strong men real-life heroes treat his mother like one of their own. Sergeant Miller knelt beside Malik and handed him a Marine Corps pin, saying, "Your mom is the kind of leader we all look up to." As the morning turned into afternoon and the Marines began to leave, each one shook Tasha's hand, hugged her, or offered words of encouragement. Before departing, Sergeant Miller told her they weren't done yet, that this was only the beginning, and they would be back. Tasha stood on her porch as the last of the Marines saluted her, the same way they would a superior. And she couldn't help but weep, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming wave of validation and purpose that had swept into her life in the most unexpected way. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, appreciated, and respected, not for what she had achieved, but for who she was at her core. And while she had no idea what was coming next, she knew, deep in her bones, that something had shifted, and her life would never be the same again. The morning after the Marines' unexpected and heartfelt visit, Tasha awoke not just to a new day but to a transformed reality, one she could scarcely comprehend yet was deeply grateful for. Everything felt different: the air, the light, even the quiet hum of the city beyond her window seemed to carry new meaning. Word of the Marines' visit had spread rapidly, not just through her neighborhood but across town and beyond, fueled by the power of social media and the collective heartbeat of people moved by her story. Someone had taken a video of the men in uniform lining her yard, and that footage, paired with a caption about a kind black woman paying for an old veteran's gas, had gone viral within hours. Thousands of people were sharing it, commenting, and wanting to know more. Local news stations picked up the story, then national networks. Tasha's phone began to ring endlessly with interview requests, messages from strangers offering prayers and gratitude, and people asking how they could help. Overwhelmed but humbled, Tasha tried to keep up, juggling her job at the diner and parenting Malik while the world outside began to shift in her favor for the first time in a long while. But the real miracle happened not on television, but in the quiet, intentional acts of a growing community now unified by her simple gesture of generosity. The Marines had kept their word. They returned later that week with supplies, care packages, and a concrete plan. Sergeant Miller explained they were organizing a fundraiser not for charity, but for recognition, empowerment, and legacy. "You showed us what real service looks like," he said, "and now it's our turn to serve you." Flyers were printed and posted everywhere, from gas stations to barbershops, churches, and schools, each featuring a smiling photo of Tate and Harold, now reunited and fast friends, along with a message about how one act of kindness can ignite a community. They named the fundraiser Fuel the Future, and it was more than just a catchy title. It became a movement. Events were held across the city, car washes hosted by Marines and local students, food drives at supermarkets, donation booths at high school football games. A nearby mechanic shop, owned by a veteran who'd seen the story online, offered to fully restore Tasha's aging vehicle for free, replacing the brakes, the transmission, repainting it a glossy maroon, and even installing new tires. At daycare center offered free childcare for a year so Tasha could attend night classes. She had always dreamed of becoming a nurse but never had the time or resources. That dream now suddenly felt within reach. A local college extended a scholarship application to her, fast-tracked by faculty who admired her resilience and grace. A grocery store chain delivered fresh food and staples to her doorstep every week, refusing payment. Clothing companies offered new outfits for Malik, including a tiny Marine costume that brought the boy to tears of joy. But more than the material support, it was the emotional support that changed everything. Every evening, Marines and neighbors would stop by, sometimes with food, sometimes with tools to fix her porch, sometimes just to talk. Elderly neighbors who had previously kept to themselves started showing up with baked goods and stories. Young mothers asked Tasha how they could get involved. Churches offered space for community dinners. Strangers became family. Through it all, Tasha remained humble, grateful, and determined not to let the spotlight change her. She used her new platform not to talk about herself, but to uplift others, highlighting families in her neighborhood who also struggled, shouting out single parents and veterans, amplifying causes that mattered. She volunteered on weekends with the Marines at shelters and food banks, wanting Malik to see firsthand what compassion could build. Slowly, the community around her began to transform, not just physically with new paint and repairs and donations, but spiritually. Where there had once been division, now there was unity. Where there had been silence and isolation, now there were conversations and shared dreams. A group of local teens who had once been known for skipping school started organizing cleanup crews and mentoring programs, citing Tasha as their inspiration. The school principal called her to speak at an assembly. On the day of the fundraiser's culmination event, a block party held at the park, hundreds showed up, including Harold in his dress blues, walking proudly beside Tasha. Booths were set up with food, games, a stage for performances, and a wall titled Acts of Kindness, where people could write about good deeds they'd witnessed or received. Donations poured in, not just money, but time, resources, commitments. By the end of the night, over $100,000 had been raised not only for Tasha, but for programs supporting veteran housing, single mothers, and job training. The Marines presented Tasha with a framed certificate, calling her an honorary member of the Corps family, and Sergeant Miller handed Malik a small globe, telling him, "Wherever you go, son, remember that kindness is your compass." Tasha stood on the stage, tears streaming down her face, her hand gripping the mic as she looked out into the crowd of faces that now meant so much to her. She didn't give a long speech. She simply said, "I didn't expect anything when I paid for Harold's gas. I just saw a man who served his country and needed a hand. I had no idea it would lead to this. But if this is what one moment of kindness can do, imagine what we could build if we chose kindness every day." The crowd erupted into cheers, not for her alone, but for what she represented, a symbol of how powerful the human spirit could be when nurtured by compassion and community. And as the music played and people danced under string lights, with food in their hands and joy in their hearts, it became clear that Tasha's life and the lives of those around her had been irreversibly changed. What had started as a quiet act at a gas station had become a roaring force for good, a reminder that we all have the power to ignite change, simply by caring enough to act. Months had passed since that unforgettable day when dozens of Marines had stood in formation on Tasha's front lawn, and while the media buzz had gradually faded and the headlines had moved on, the legacy of that moment had only grown stronger, deeper, and more enduring in the hearts of those it touched. The ripple effect of her one quiet, selfless decision had become a tidal wave of compassion, transformation, and unity that reshaped not just her life, but her entire community's soul. Tasha, once a quiet and humble single mother juggling two jobs just to keep the lights on, had become a symbol of what real kindness could do, not just in word, but in action, in movement, in spirit. She still worked hard, still raised Malik with the same fierce devotion, but now she did it with the support of hundreds who had been inspired by her story. Neighbors who looked out for her, volunteers who showed up to help with community gardens she started, youth programs she helped fund, and parents she mentored with patience and grace. Harold, the man whose gas tank she had filled that cold morning, became more than a friend. He became her family, her advisor, her cheerleader, and a grandfather figure to Malik, sharing stories of battles survived and victories earned, always reminding the boy that strength doesn't come from muscles, but from heart. As Tasha built her nursing degree little by little, attending classes at night and studying during her short breaks, the Marines continued to stand by her, checking in regularly, inviting her to speak at their events, and honoring her at veterans. There are ceremonies where she stood proudly in front of rows of uniformed soldiers, humbled by the salutes they gave her, but she never let praise define her. She saw it instead as a platform, a responsibility, a chance to continue paying it forward. She started a local non-profit named Refuel Hope, a tribute to the moment that started it all, and through it, she launched mentorship programs for struggling parents, transportation services for elderly veterans, and small grants for women trying to escape cycles of poverty or abuse. The nonprofit wasn't big in budget, but it was massive in heart, and every soul it touched became part of an ever-expanding chain of goodness. Then came the day of the community event, a reunion, a celebration, and a recognition ceremony rolled into one, hosted by the city and the Marine Corps in the largest park downtown. Hundreds attended, from local officials to school teachers, single moms, veterans, and children from every walk of life. Tasha walked into the event arm in arm with Harold and Malik, who proudly wore a tiny version of a Marine uniform stitched just for him. Booths lined the park, decorated in red, white, and blue, but also in vibrant colors representing all the different cultures and families that had come together through this story. There were games, food trucks, local bands playing music, and a huge tent in the center where speeches were scheduled. When it came time, Sergeant Miller took the stage and spoke with powerful emotion about what Tasha had done, not just for Harold, but for them all. "She reminded us," he said, "what service really means. Not just military service, but service to one another. She reignited a fire in us." He invited Tasha up, and the crowd rose to their feet in thunderous applause. As she took the stage, she paused, stunned by the sight before her. Hundreds of faces, many smiling, some with tears in their eyes, children waving small flags, elderly veterans standing in silence with hands over their hearts, all honoring her not because she was perfect, but because she had acted with love when no one was looking. She held back tears as she accepted a plaque from the Marines, engraved with the words, "To Tasha Williams," whose single act of kindness became a beacon of light. Semper Fidelis. The moment was surreal, yet grounding. She looked out into the sea of faces and began to speak, not from a speech he had written, but from the place inside her that had always known struggle, compassion, and hope. She talked about how hard her life had been, how kindness had often felt like a luxury she couldn't afford, but that morning standing at the gas pump she had simply seen a man who needed help, and she knew she had to do something. You didn't do it for a thank you, I didn't do it for a reward. I did it because it was right. And I believe every one of us has those moments, those chances to choose kindness, even when no one's watching. And when we do, we don't just change one life, we create a ripple, a wave, a legacy. The audience was silent, captivated. You don't need a uniform to serve. You don't need a badge or a title. All you need is a heart willing to see someone else's pain and say, "I've got you." Her words landed deep in the crowd's chest, stirring something primal, something hopeful. As she stepped down, people lined up not just to shake her hand or take pictures, but to tell her their stories, how her act inspired them to forgive a family member, to donate to a neighbor, to volunteer at the shelter, to believe again. Children handed her crayon drawings of Marines and angels. Adults told her how they paid for someone else's groceries just the week before because they had seen her video. One elderly woman said through tears, "You reminded me that kindness isn't dead." That night, as the sun dipped below the skyline and the stars began to emerge, Tasha sat with Harold and Malik on a bench under the lights of the event, the sound of laughter and music echoing around them. Malik leaned his head on her shoulder, tired but happy, and Harold whispered, "You've done something rare. Tasha, you've changed lives by simply being you." She smiled, brushing tears from her cheeks, and it all started with a full tank of gas. They sat in silence for a while, watching the crowd begin to disperse, knowing that while the event might end, the movement had only just begun. Tasha knew that life would still have challenges. There would still be bills, long nights, unexpected turns, but now she faced them with a village behind her, with the knowledge that kindness never goes unnoticed and often returns in the most unexpected and powerful ways. Her story was no longer just hers, it belonged to a city, a community, a generation that had seen what love without conditions could build. And from that day forward, in schools, in churches, in town halls and homes, her name and her example were spoken not with awe but with familiarity, because she had shown that ordinary people doing small things with great love could heal a fractured world, one moment at a time.